All right, good day, good morning, good evening, good night to you, wherever and whenever you're watching me. This is your brother and friend Maurice. What are we talking about? Well, we are continuing with our series of studies on the passing away of the heavens and earth. Our topic is the dissolving of the heavens and earth. And you're watching the new Kosmos Videocast.
This is the new Kosmos Videocast. You've never heard it like this anywhere. Welcome.
And welcome. So we continue with our series on the theme, the passing away of the heavens and earth. This is the 6th video of this series. And to see the previous 5 videos, I will put the link to the playlist on the top right here. Or you may visit the new Kosmos Videocast channel, look in the playlist, The Passing Away of the Heavens and Earth. Also, let me encourage you to sign up for a membership on patreon.com/newcosmos. You'll find there 4 membership tiers. If you choose the 2nd, the 3rd, or the 4th tiers, you can have access to my videos before they are released on YouTube up to 2 weeks ahead. Additionally, the 3rd or the 4th tiers give you access to the new Kosmos Masterclass. By way of review, last study we looked at, according to the Apostle Peter, the heavens and earth in his day were about to pass away, in his generation, in his time. He said that based on what Jesus had promised and by the confirmation of the signs which Jesus had given in Matthew 24, the apostles were seeing these signs coming to pass in their time. The day of the Lord was hastening to the folks in Peter's day. And just like Babylon's heavens and earth passed away in 540 BC, Israel's heavens and earth passed away in the year 70. So let us begin with our topic today, the dissolving of the heavens and earth. And we're going to read from 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10. And we're going to read this from the New American Standard Bible, which I believe in this particular case has a slightly better, more accurate translation than the English Standard Version. It says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be destroyed." Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with fervent heat, right? And he goes on to say, but according to his promise, according to Jesus' promise, we are looking for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Okay? So that is the text that we are going to base our study on. And speaking about the passing away, Peter is describing the passing away of the heavens and earth, and he's describing it as the elements will be destroyed, the earth and its works will be discovered, the heavens will pass away with a roar, and he says that, repeats it here, the heavens will be destroyed by burning, the elements will melt, and that will give way to a new heavens and a new earth. All right? Now, based on what we learned about heavens and earth in our previous studies, we know that heavens and earth in the understanding of the apostles do not mean the material or physical heavens and earth. For example, Peter is not speaking here about the celestial heavens, such as the sun, the moon, the stars, the galaxies, Milky Way, and so on. And he is not speaking about the entire earth, okay, where life is. He is speaking about the covenant heavens and earth, okay? And we'll elaborate on that. If you want more information on that as well, look at the previous studies in this playlist, all right? Now, but just let us entertain the thought of, let's say, for example, let's say it is true that Peter, as the majority of the Christian church believes, that Peter is speaking here about the material heavens and earth, right? Peter's talking about the actual sun, the actual moon, the actual stars, the Milky Way, and so on, the solar system, and so on, and the actual earth, the entire earth. Okay, let's say that is true. Let us read what Jesus said in Matthew 24, right? Because Peter is teaching what Jesus told him, right? So in Matthew 24, Jesus talks about the same thing. Let's read verse 29 and 30, okay? And we'll ask some questions. Look what Jesus said. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the skies. Okay, so here we have the destruction of the heavens, okay? And the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Okay, that's what Jesus said. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. Now, let's ask this question. Here we have the destruction of the heavens and the stars falling from the sky to the earth. Let's say this is literally what Jesus meant, that the physical stars, which we know are planets, okay, which we know are cosmic bodies, right? Which most of them are bigger than the earth in size and mass. Let's say we are reading, and we are to understand what Jesus says from a scientific perspective. Let's forget for a moment that Jesus was living in an ancient Near East context, and he was speaking using ancient Near East language to people who had an ancient Near East perspective and mindset and worldview. Let's forget all about that. Let's just suppose that Jesus said this yesterday, not 2,000 years ago, right? So therefore, we are to read it and understand it from our modern scientific perspective. That would mean that the physical planets would be falling from the sky to the earth, right? The heavens, which would include all the planets, including the earth, will be shaking. Do you think it makes sense in verse 10 then, when you have that happening, that the tribes of the earth will mourn? Do you think that when that's happening, that it would be possible for anybody to be alive on the earth, to even see what was happening and even mourn for what they are seeing? Do you think that is possible? We have to understand that Christ was using the same language that Isaiah used in Isaiah 13, right? Now let's check out Isaiah 13, right? Let's jump back to, because you remember, Christ was an Old Testament prophet. He was an Old Covenant prophet. Christ's ministry on earth was during the time of the Old Covenant. That made him an Old Covenant prophet. A lot of people don't realize that, right? And so Christ would be using the same genre of language that the Old Covenant prophets used. So let's jump over to Isaiah and look at chapter 13, right? And let's just read verse 1 to get our context. We did this study already. We have a study which is entitled The Passing of Nebuchadnezzar's Heavens and Earth. Okay, so you could go and watch that for the entire study. But I'm just giving you the essence of that study. Okay, to show you Jesus's language in Matthew 24 verses 29 and 30 was the was similar to Isaiah's language in Isaiah 13. So Isaiah said here the pronouncement concerning what? Babylon, right? So we know this chapter deals with Babylon. Good? So let's jump down to verse 9. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel with fury and burning anger, to make the land, so this would be the land of Babylon, right? The land is desolation, and he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven, now watch this now, the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. So you see, you have the same commotion going on in the heavens here, according to Isaiah, like what Jesus said in Matthew, right? The heavens are being affected. Okay? Now, what Isaiah wrote here is speaking of something that happened already. In the year 540 BC, Isaiah is speaking about an event which at the time Isaiah wrote it was future to Isaiah, but to us, it has already happened, right? Isaiah was speaking about the destruction of Babylon, or the defeat of Babylon by the Medes and Persians, right? But he's describing it using this language. So he goes on in verse 11, so I, God, will punish the world, and again, the world here would be Babylon's world, right? Because remember, we got our context in verse 1. This passage is speaking about Babylon, the land of Babylon, the world of Babylon, the heavens of Babylon, the earth or the land of Babylon, okay? I will punish the world of Babylon for its evil and the wicked for their wrongdoing. I will also put an end to the audacity of the proud and humiliate the arrogance of the tyrants, okay? Let's jump down to verse 13. Therefore, I will make the heavens what? Tremble. So Babylon's heavens trembled, right? Because the context here is Babylon. But even if we want to say, no, this is speaking about the whole heaven, is there any historical? Because if the heavens were trembling, if the sun went out, if the moon did not give his light, there must have been a historical record of it. That is something that would have been something that is too great, too cataclysmic for it not to be recorded in every single nation, by every historian, by every scribe on the planet at that time. Would have recorded that. We have no such record. Okay? And the earth will be shaken from its place. Again, that in and of itself would mean that we are not even to be here right now, because if the earth was shaken out of its place in the year 540 BC, that's 500, that would be 2,540 years ago, that would mean that the earth no longer exists, right? But we have to understand the word earth here is the word eretz, which does not mean the entire world. It means a region, and in this case, it would be Babylon, right? The land of Babylon was shaken from its place, and even that is still metaphoric, right? It's just describing the scale of the calamity and destruction that came to Babylon using this type of language, right? Let's jump down to verse 13. Well, no, okay, we are already at verse 13, sorry. So let's read verse 14. And it will be that, like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with no one to gather them, each of them will turn to his own people, and each of them will flee to his own land. Okay, so we can stop here, because should be clear to anyone that when Isaiah said the earth would be shaken from its place, yet people will be able to flee out of Babylon to their own land, then that should be the open and shut case, right? That should tell you clearly that this is not literal, okay? If the earth is shaken from its place, nobody could flee anywhere. Okay? Because if we are interpreting it scientifically, that would mean the entire planet would be shaking, the entire planet would be destroyed, so nobody could flee anywhere because everybody would be dead. Good? So we understand the shaking of Babylon, the shaking of Babylon's land, the shaking of Babylon's heavens was a local event. Yes, it was a catastrophic event. There was a lot of death. There was a lot of violence. And Babylon's heavens, that is its religion, its aristocracy, its royalty, those who are in the intellectual realm, the priesthood and so on, they were destroyed. The land, which included, yes, the buildings and so on, but also the ordinary people, they were destroyed as well. That's Babylon's heavens and earth. Good? So this is the same language that Isaiah used to describe when Medo-Persia, by the way, let's just jump down to verse 17 and 18 to establish what the Lord said. He said, behold, I am going to stir up the Medes against Babylon, who will not value, etc., right? And their bows, so here we have military weapons, will mow down the young men, they will not, and so on, right? And Babylon, verse 19, the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. So we know this is talking about the overthrow of Babylon by a war in which the Medes and the Persians would come up against. And this happened historically. 539, 540, across that time, BC. Good? But the solar system was not affected. The sun was not affected. The actual sun, yes, the sun was obscured by the smoke of the fires, right? And the moon also would be obscured by those same smoke, clouds of smoke and fires. Yes, the force and the violence of the attack would have shaken the buildings, but not to the extent of the language used. Good? So this is the same language. By the way, the people, according to verse 14, some of them were able to flee to the surrounding nations. Okay? Again, that tells you this language is not to be taken literally. Good? So when we go back to what Jesus said in Matthew 24, we see that he's saying the sun will be dark and the moon will give light. Why? Because of the smoke from the destruction. Okay? It's not that the literal sun will switch off. And the moon would switch off, the stars will fall, and so on. The powers of heaven will be shaken. All of this kind of language is not only talking about the war and the violence and the calamity, how it would affect the appearance of these things, but also the powers of the heavens also talks about, as I said, the aristocracy, the royalty, the priesthood, the intellectuals, the teachers, and so on. Those of the intellectual and spiritual and religious realm, they were shaken, they were affected, they were destroyed, but also those of the land, the common people and the buildings and so on, right? That's the terminology that is being used there. Okay? Look at verse 29. It says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, these things would happen, right? And also, notice, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see. Okay, so this is something that the people in that time would see. Okay? Now, who are the people who Jesus said would see these things? Who were the people who would see the tribulation, or who would experience the tribulation, who were the people who would see the sun darkened and the moon not giving its light and the stars falling? Who are these people who would be there to witness the powers of the heavens shaken? Who are these people who would see the sign of the Son of Man appearing in the sky? Who are these people who are the tribes of the land, not the earth? The word there again is gay, using the same context as the Hebrew word eret. Because in Jesus' prediction now, Jesus is not speaking about the entire world. Just like Isaiah was not speaking about the entire world. Jesus is speaking about a region, and that is Israel's region, Judea, within the Roman Empire. That's the gay, or the land that Jesus is speaking about. That's the location, right? And so the tribes of that land, the people of that land, of that region, were the ones who would mourn, and they would see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. Well, who are these people? Right? Let's look at verse 3. Let's go up in the same chapter and look at verse 3. It says there, and when he, that is Jesus, was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Privately meaning there were no others. There was no crowd. There was no multitude. Just the disciples. Now, in Mark, it tells you who the disciples were. So let's just jump to Mark briefly to find out who these disciples that came were. Mark 13 verse 3, it says there, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, look now, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, 4 disciples, according to Mark, 4 disciples were questioning him how? Privately. Remember, we just came from Matthew 24, where it says disciples came to him privately. Now, Mark is identifying these disciples as Peter, James, John, and Andrew. Okay? So it was not even all the disciples, just these 4. Right? And so Jesus's conversation was directed to these 4 disciples. Good? So let's go back to Matthew 24 now and continue. So as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, Peter, James, John, and Andrew came to him privately. So we take the information from Mark and we slot it in here. Good? Because it's the same thing they're talking about, okay? So Peter, James, John, and Andrew came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things happen? What were the things? In verse 2, when the buildings, let's read from verse 1, Jesus left the temple area and was going on his way when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. Good? And what would happen to the temple buildings? Jesus says, there would not be one stone here that will be left upon another, which will not be torn down. So the temple buildings will be torn down completely. That's these things that verse 3 is talking about, right? So tell us, they asked Jesus, tell us, when will the temple buildings be torn down completely? Good. And what will be the sign of your coming? So Jesus' coming would be associated, would be linked to this tearing down of the temple buildings and the end of the age. So that temple buildings, those temple buildings would be torn down at the end of the age. Again, game over. Game over, because we know historically the temple was torn down in the year 70. So that means the year 70 was the end of the age. And by that time, Jesus would have returned. Or Jesus did return, right? Because all these things were to happen in the same timeline. Good? So there we have our context of who were these people who were to see these things happen. Peter, James, John, and Andrew at least. had to be there to be witnessing these things happening. Okay? Peter, James, and so that is why Peter is writing in 2 Peter chapter 3. And he is so confident in 1 Peter chapter 4 that the end of all things was at hand. We saw that in our study before. That is why he was so confident when he said to the mockers, look, you don't understand, right? That Jesus has promised and he will keep the promise. He's not slack concerning his promise, but he is showing you patience, right? He's long suffering, but he will keep the promise because the promise was that there are some who were standing there listening to Jesus who would not die until they see the Son of Man come in his kingdom. Right? He even told Caiaphas, Jesus even told Caiaphas that they will see the Son of Man coming in the power of his Father. Good? So these things were to happen in that generation, not 2,000 years later in our time. There is no way you can get around this thing without calling Jesus a liar, without calling Jesus a false prophet. Good? So he says, so Jesus began to tell them all the things that they, Peter, James, Andrew, and John, would see. Not you in the 24th century. Peter, James, and John in their time would see these things. Good? So verse 15, for example, therefore, when you see, who is he speaking to? He's speaking to Peter, James, and John. So he said, when you, Peter, James, and John, see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel, the prophet, standing in the holy place. Standing where? The holy place is an area of the temple, of the Jerusalem temple. Right? That's in the sanctuary of the Jerusalem temple. Let the reader understand. Okay? Then let those who are where? In Judea. Again, Jesus gives the location of these events. He never said in the United States. He never said in Russia. He never said in Asia. He never said it in Korea, North Korea. He didn't say it in the Caribbean. He didn't say in South America. He didn't say in Central America. He didn't say in Europe. He said in Judea. Right? But we have the modern church scaremongering and fearmongering people with every event, everything that happens. Oh, it's the sign. Jesus said this would happen. It's a sign. Jesus' signs were restricted to Judea, that land, that Eretz. So he says, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Good? So it's something that is in the location of the disciples. It's something in the lifetime of the disciples. They would see these things happening. Verse 21. Again, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor will ever again. So if you have a tribulation happening in the time of the disciples, in the time of the apostles, which Jesus said will ever again happen. How is it we are still looking for the same tribulation when Jesus said once that tribulation happens, it will never happen again? But yet the modern church is saying, oh yeah, we are waiting the tribulation every year. Yes, the tribulation is near. It's about to happen. We are going to go into Jacob's tribulation. The time of trouble is here. Every year we have this specious speculation. Every year we have these fantastical fear-mongering. But Jesus said the tribulation, the disciples would see it. It would happen in their time. Right? Notice Jesus told them in verse 15 that the abomination of desolation would happen while the temple in Jerusalem was still standing, the holy place. Right? And at that time, in verse 21, is when you will have the great tribulation, during the time when the temple in Jerusalem was standing. And that great tribulation, Jesus said, it was such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will again. Right? So the tribulation that happened at that temple, which we know was the 3.5 year civil war, that Jesus said will never happen again. But yet the modern church is telling us every year that we must look out for this same tribulation, the great tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. Good. Let's continue in verse 29. Verse 29. But immediately after we're back to where we started, right? So these were the things that the disciples, Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, were to be looking for and did see. These were the people whom Jesus gave these signs and tell them to look for them. Good? So when we come to Peter in 2 Peter 3, when Peter said, the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, the earth and its works will be discovered. Was he speaking of something else than what Jesus spoke of in Matthew 24? Was he speaking about a different heavens being shaken? Or was he speaking what Jesus told him to speak? Was he teaching the word of Christ? Or was he teaching some other prophecy? You see? These are the cans of worms that the modern church has opened up and cannot solve. These train wrecks, because they have ignored the context of Jesus' words. They have ignored that Jesus was speaking in an ancient Near East context. They have interpreted Jesus' words through a modern day scientific lens, right? Which Jesus was not at all using that modern day scientific context. Good? So here we have Peter using the same sort of language as Isaiah 13, right? The heavens will be destroyed by burning. The elements will melt with fervent heat. The earth and its works will be discovered. These are the same sort of language that Isaiah used for the destruction of Babylon, a local event to Babylon. Peter is now using the same language. So how come all of a sudden this language becomes worldwide? How come it all of a sudden becomes worldwide when Jesus focused the day of the Lord, destruction, to Judea? And he said you can escape this judgment by fleeing from Judea. Right? Just like how the people in Babylon could have fled that destruction by fleeing Babylon. The folks in the time of this judgment that Peter's writing about here, which is the same day of the Lord that Jesus spoke about, they could flee it by fleeing Judea. They could get out of Judea and avoid it. Right? All we need to do is just read the scripture and understand the context, or understand the audience relevance, and apply a proper hermeneutic. And it becomes fairly clear what Peter meant. It becomes fairly clear what Jesus meant. Okay? So we see, if we go and read the historian Josephus, if you have the time to go through Josephus' account of the 3.5 year war, the civil war that began in 66, culminated in the year 70, you can read between the lines, because Josephus was a Jew. He had no idea about Jesus' prediction and Jesus' prophecy, right? He was just writing what he saw. as an eyewitness, and you would find how what Josephus wrote sounds remarkably like what Jesus predicted. Okay? It sounds remarkably like what Jesus predicted. And Josephus was just writing what he saw happened during that 3.5-year war. By the way, in my book, Everything is Temple, I document to a certain extent all these things that Josephus recorded and show how they lined up with what Jesus predicted. Okay, so I devote a chapter in my book to address the things that Jesus predicted and how Josephus, the historian who was on the spot, recorded how they were fulfilled. Right? So we have a secular, so to speak, historical record telling us exactly how these things were fulfilled so that we don't have to look for them still in the 21st century. Right? But the modern church is going full bore ahead with their scientific interpretation. Right? They're going full bore ahead with the scientific interpretation, which forces them every year to be moving the goalpost, so to speak, of the concerning the coming of Christ, the day of the Lord, and the other eschatological events which were associated with that. All right? We will continue looking at how Peter described the passing of the heavens and earth when I come back. All right, so we are back. We are looking at how Peter described the passing of the heavens and earth, and we're looking at the language that Peter used, and we are seeing that Peter used the same language that the old covenant prophets used, especially like Isaiah. We are given as an example Isaiah chapter 13, where Isaiah described the destruction of Babylon by the Medes and Persians as the passing away of Babylon's heavens and earth. Okay? That was a local destruction, a local judgment. Okay? But it was given in terms of a cosmic judgment. Good? Now, let's go back to Peter. So Peter's writing here in 2 Peter 3. We dealt with verses 10, 11, and 12. Okay? In terms of the language used, or we are dealing with verses 10, 11, and 12 in terms of the language used. Now, let's look at this. Go back to verse 10 and verse 12. It says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat." And verse 12 reiterates that. It says, "Looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat." Now, the reason why I'm reading this from the New American Standard Bible is because the English Standard Version renders verse 10 and 12, the elements there, as the heavenly bodies. Okay? And verse 12 also, the elements is rendered as the heavenly bodies. All right? And some other, like the NET also takes that position as well, the New English Translation. So let me just show you that. Verse 12 in the New English Translation. It says, let's go verse 10 first. It says, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief. When it comes, the heavens will disappear with a horrific noise, and the celestial bodies, okay? That's what the NET says, will melt away in a blaze. The earth and every deed done on it will be laid bare. Since all these things are to melt away, what sort of people you must be conducting your lives while waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God. Because of this day, the heavens will be burned up and dissolved, and the celestial bodies, again, that's how the NET translates this word, which the King James renders it as, in verse 12 and 10, the King James puts it as the elements, and in verse 12, the elements. All right? So what are these elements about? And is it correct to say the heavenly bodies? Now, in a sense, right? In a sense, I can see, since we have a picture, a celestial picture, we're talking about heavens, the stars, the sun, the moon, right? So I can understand it being translated as heavenly bodies, because Peter was talking here about the heavens passing away with a great noise. Good. So therefore, the heavenly bodies of those heavens would melt with fervent heat. Okay. And in verse 12, let me get back the Bible there for you. The verse 12, he's talking about the heavens again being on fire. And so the heavenly bodies of those heavens would melt, right? But again, just remember the context of Peter's language. Peter was not talking about the celestial heavens. He was talking about the covenant heavens, right? And if you go back in our studies, you'll see the covenant heavens deal with the temple. Okay, so in the temple you had the heaven of God, which was the most holy place, and then you had the heaven of the priesthood, which was the holy place. And these heavens were what were reigning over Israel. These heavens were what God used to disseminate his light, his knowledge, his teaching through the Levitical priesthood, through the Old Covenant priesthood of the Old Covenant temple. So in that context, yes, we can understand it being translated as in the English Standard Version here, as in verse 10, it says the heavenly bodies, right? It says, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief, then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies. So those would be those things which dwell in the heavens. Okay? So you have the heavens passing away, but you have the things which dwell in the heavens. Okay? But again, from our previous studies, we understood those things which dwell in the heavens were the priests. The priests were the heavenly bodies, right? The priests were the lights. The priests were those who gave light to Israel, and the priests dwelled in the heavens of the temple. So again, heavenly bodies is not such a bad translation in the context of the covenant heavens, right? Which would be the temple sanctuary. Good? And so, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, in which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn. Again, so you have, again, the same thought. Good? But still, I just want to delve a bit into this word that is translated by the English Standard Version as the heavenly bodies, and in the other translations, such as the King James, the NET, and several others, it is translated as the not the NET, sorry, the NASB, the New American Standard Bible, as the elements. Good? The NET has it as the celestial bodies. The English Standard Version has it as the heavenly bodies, but the King James has it as the elements, and the New American Standard Bible has it as the elements. But let's look at this word, which in the Greek is the word stoichian, right? Stoichian. And the word stoichian, the definition given there is any first thing from which the others belonging to some series or composite whole take their rise. An element or first principle. Okay, so these are like the fundamental and foundation teaching or building blocks, right? So that's where you get the word elements, right? Of anything, whether it is spiritual or physical or psychological or philosophical or religious, anything that is like the rudiments or the fundamentals of that is a stoichian. Okay? Such as example, the letters of the alphabet as the elements of speech, right? So you have speech conveying grand thoughts and principles and ideas, but that speech broken down to its simplest form are the letters. Well, in terms of speech, you would have the sounds, the a, e, u, t, b, h. These are the elements of the speech. In terms of written language, they would be the letters of the alphabet. Again, the letters of the alphabet put together, and they form all of these thoughts, and these grand ideas are conveyed and communicated, right? Big words like onomatopoeia, eschatological, okay? But in the word eschatological, you have E-S-C-H-A-T, right? These are the elements of the word. Good? Again, so you're getting the idea that an element is like a rudiment, building block, things that make up stuff, used to combine to make a bigger either idea, a thought, a word, or even in terms of, science and so on. Also, you have elements in science, right? You have like the different scientific elements, like the iron, gold, and all of these other elements in chemistry. Okay? But Peter wasn't talking about chemistry. All right? So that's the idea of elements. Now, even though we have that, we need to also look at how did the apostles use this word, right? How did the apostles use this word? So we can look at, for example, Paul. Paul used this word quite a lot, actually. Okay? So let's look at how Paul used this word. So we can go to Galatians. We know Galatians was written by Paul. Okay, so let's get our Bible. We're going to go back to the English Standard Version and go to Galatians 4 and look at verse 9. All right? So Paul said there in verse 9, speaking to the Galatians, he said, "But now that you have come to know God, or rather, to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world?" Now, elementary principles of the world is the word stoichian. All right? Elementary principles of the world, there is the word stoichian. Right? Whose slaves you want to be once more. You observe days, months, and seasons, and years. So these were the stoichian now that Paul was talking about. Okay? Paul said the observance of days, months, and seasons and years were elementary principles which were weak and worthless. Okay? So we know now that Paul, in the context of what he was writing there, he was contrasting the new covenant worship to the old covenant worship. Right? And once you have transitioned out from the old covenant to the new covenant, right? Which, according to the book of Hebrews, is a superior covenant. According to Paul's writings as well, is a superior covenant, right? Then what you came out from is now superseded, has now been superseded, and so it is actually null and void. It has become obsolete, according to Hebrews 8:13. Good? So Paul was saying, look, there were some Galatians who were going back to things which in the new covenant had become obsolete. In other words, weak and worthless, these are the words he used here, right? You're going back to things which are obsolete. And these things are elementary principles of that old covenant world. Whether it was the observing of days or months and seasons and years, or it was the doing of the sacrifices and offerings, he says those are elementary principles of that old covenant world. Good? And he was saying, look, especially if you are a Gentile, right? Because we know we had Gentiles in the church. We had Jews and we had Gentiles. But you see, what happened is that the Jews were trying to get the Gentiles to observe their Jewish obligation. Okay? And Paul is saying, look, the Jewish obligation, if you are a Gentile, you are not under the Jewish obligation. These things are weak and worthless. Right? You are already in a superior covenant. Why are you going to these things which are elementary principles of the old system when you are in a new and living way? Right? And he gave an example here. The days and months and seasons and years of the old covenant are these stoichian. These are the elements that Paul was speaking about. So we beginning to see a bit clearer of this stoichian, about these elements, about these heavenly bodies. Okay? Let's look at Colossians 2. Right? Colossians 2. Paul again writing, he uses the same word, stoichian, again, in verse 20. He says there, if with Christ you died to the elemental spirits. Now, this is the way that the English Standard Version translates this, but it's the same stoichian. If you died to the stoichian of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? And look what it says again. Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. Right? Again, these are old covenant things. These are things, these are elements of the old covenant. Right? Where if you touch certain things, you become unclean. So you can't touch dead body, you can't touch an unclean person, and so on and so forth, because you will become unclean if you touch unclean things. Paul says those were the teachings of the old covenant, and if you are in Christ, you died to that. Okay? He made a similar statement in Romans 7, verse 4. Look what he said in Romans 7, verse 4. He says, likewise, my brothers, you have also died to the law. And obviously, he's talking about the old covenant administration. Right? In Colossians 2, he says, you have died to the elemental spirits of the world. Touch not, taste not, handle not. Right? Holy days, Sabbath days, feast days, yearly Sabbaths, annual Sabbaths. He says all of that, those are elements of the old world. Right? Here he's saying you have died to that. That the law, the old covenant administration through the body of Christ, so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. So again, we see Paul, when he's using that word stoichian, he's not talking about chemical elements. He's not talking about letters of the alphabet. He's not even talking about celestial bodies like the sun, the moon, and stars. He's actually talking about the law, right? He's talking about the old covenant law and its administration. Good? So it would make sense that Peter also would be of that similar understanding, right? Because you remember, when we did our series of studies concerning the new cosmos, right, and even the temple of the heavens and the earth, we saw there how the temple, the old covenant temple, the lights of the old covenant temple were the priesthood, the priests who administered the law, because the law was also linked to the law. The commandments of the law were called a lamp, and the priesthood were to give that light to Israel. Okay, and there was even the 7-branch candlestick within that holy place, again representing the light that Israel had through the Torah and the Tanakh, right? But according to the prophets, that these were to be superseded by the Spirit of God indwelling the believer, right? So, for example, if you look at Isaiah 60, verse 19, Isaiah 60, let's see what the prophet Isaiah had to say about the light, right? The lights of the heavens. 60, verse 19, it says, "The sun shall be no more your light by day, nor for brightness shall the moon give you light." So notice, the sun will be taken away. The moon shall be taken away. But the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. So here we notice that the celestial lights, right, were going to be replaced by the divine light. Now, the celestial lights here were not speaking about the celestial sun. This was talking about the covenant sun, which was the law. Okay? And the other covenant heavenly bodies, again, which were the priest and the priesthood. Okay? That was going to pass away. And what would be the new light? It would be the Lord and God. Right? Which when you go to Revelation 21, it tells you there, Revelation 21 and Revelation 22, it tells you the light of the city is God and the Lamb. Okay? Why? Because the covenant sun and the covenant moon had passed away. Right? So you see, you can't just take Peter and put him by himself and have him saying, oh yeah, this is talking about the material heavens and the material earth. But when you go to Revelation, Revelation is telling you that the sun will be replaced by God and his Lamb. You have Isaiah telling you that the sun and the moon will be replaced by God's glory. Well, obviously, when you read Isaiah, when you read Revelation, you will say, oh no, that is talking about spiritual light or covenantal light. Well, why is now Peter going to be an exception to that rule? Why is Peter all of a sudden going to be saying, no, Peter's talking about the real actual sun and the real actual moon and the actual earth? That's not consistent. Let's look at Revelation 21:23 as what I'm talking about, right? Revelation 21:23. Because if we are saying Peter is talking about, the actual heavens and the actual earth, Well, what is Revelation 21:23 talking about? It says, and the city has no need of the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. That's exactly what we read in Isaiah 60 verse 19. Okay? But it is being showing that light is being fulfilled not only by God, Yahweh the Father, but also the Son, the Lamb, Yahweh the Son. Okay, good. So we see there that these things are not speaking about the actual material celestial sun and moon, but it was the light, the covenant light that came through the ministry of the priesthood in the Old Covenant temple, right? Let's look at Hebrews 9 verse 24 again to show you. Hebrews 9 verse 24 tells us, Hebrews 9, look at verse 24. It says, for Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things. So notice, the holy places made with hands were the temple sanctuary. You had the holy place and the most holy place. Those were the holy places which were made by hands. Okay? But Christ did not enter into those. What Christ entered into? Into heaven itself. Now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf, right? So the sanctuary, holy places were actually pointing to, they represented, but they were not actually, okay? But they represented heaven. Good? And so when the Romans burnt the temple to the ground, let's go back to 2 Peter here. When the Romans burnt the temple to the ground, you have a situation in which the heavens were passing away. That is the most holy place and the holy place. When you had the elements destroyed, you had all the associated things of the sanctuary. You had the candlestick, you had the altar of incense, you had the table of shewbread. Well, in that temple, there was no Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was never placed in the second temple. But all the other things, the curtains, the gold utensils, everything, all of that burnt, right? And so that priesthood, the ministry of that priesthood was burnt. There was no place for the priesthood to function, right? So that would be the heavens and the elements of the heavens, or you may say the heavens and the heavenly bodies, that firmament of that sanctuary, that Old Covenant sanctuary, that actually literally burned when the temple was burned to the ground by the Romans, right? And Jerusalem, which was the city of the people of God of the Old Covenant, that also literally burned. So you have the heavens and earth were actually on fire in the context of the temple and Jerusalem, right? But also you have the covenant, which was associated with the Jerusalem temple and the earthly Jerusalem, that also, you can say, was also on fire, right? And so that fiery destruction was in itself a powerful symbol of the judgment of God upon what Paul called that system of death, that ministration of death, right? And he brought it to its end, having established a new system or a new world or a new cosmos. That's where this ministry gets its name from. The new cosmos, right? Which is the new covenant world in which life reigns, in which, as Peter says in verse 13, they were looking for that new heavens and earth, that new cosmos in which dwells righteousness. You see, the living righteousness of God, which is in Christ. That's what reigns in this new covenant cosmos, while the law was what was reigning in the old covenant. Okay? But now you have a living priest in the new covenant, right? In the new cosmos. Let's read Haggai 2, verse 6 and 7, right? Haggai 2, verse 6 and 7. Okay, let's see what the prophet Haggai had to say concerning this. Right? Haggai chapter 2 and verse 6. Here's what Haggai said. So I wanted to take notice of something here in verse 6. Haggai writes, "For this is what the Lord of armies says, once more in a little while I'm going to shake the heavens and earth, the seas also and the dry land." Now, when he wrote it, he says once more, which means that sometime before Haggai wrote this, there was an event in which God had shaken the heavens and earth prior, because he says once more. So he had already done it, and then he was going to do it again. So let's ask the question, when did God shake the heavens and earth before? It had to be, I'm assuming, it was during the first temple destruction. I'm assuming it is when God destroyed Solomon's temple. That was the shaking of the heavens and earth. That's the first time. And he says, I'm going to shake it once more. So that would be the second temple, which was done in the year 70. Right? So here we have that first shaking of the heavens and earth. And the second was being predicted by Haggai. Okay? Now, let's look at Hebrews 12, right? Let's see how Hebrews 12 interprets what Haggai wrote, right? Hebrews 12, verse 26. Hebrews 12, verse 26. Look what it says. "And his voice shook the earth then, but now he has promised, saying, Yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also," say, it's referring to what we just read here in Haggai 2, right? Where we just read, God said, once more, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth, right? It's referring. Look at verse 27 now. "This expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken, as of created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain." So God is going to shake stuff so that the eternal things, that's the things which cannot be shaken, may remain. Again, this is a contrast. The entire book of Hebrews is a contrast between the old covenant and the new covenant, or you may say the first covenant and the second covenant, right? So anytime you see a contrast in the book of Hebrews, the first thing should come to your mind is they are contrasting the old and the new. So the thing which was created for natural man, that was the old covenant, right? And the things and the things which cannot be shaken. So these are the spiritual, eternal things which was made for the spiritual man, right? That would remain. Again, the old covenant was for natural man. The new covenant was for spiritual man, right? You read that in 1 Corinthians 15. It says, that which is natural is first, and that which is spiritual is after. Okay, good. So you have the natural that was going to be shaken, and it's going to be shaken away. And the spiritual would remain. Good. Therefore, so he makes the statement about Haggai 2, indicating that God was going to remove some things and some things would remain. And then he says, "Therefore, since we have a kingdom which cannot be shaken." You see what was going to be shaken? The kingdom, right? What kingdom? The covenant kingdom of God. What was God governing the kingdom by? Covenants. So in the old covenant, God's kingdom, the kingdom of God, was under the old covenant. In the new covenant, the kingdom is under the new covenant, right? So it's the kingdom. Good. And once that kingdom is shaken, the old covenant stuff was going to be removed. Right? And the new covenant stuff would be remained, because you see, during that 40-year period between the pouring out of the Holy Spirit in the year 30 and the destruction of the temple in the year 70, you had both things coexisting. You had elements from the old covenant and you had elements of the new covenant coexisting. Then there was the shaking, right? And as that shaking intensified, you'll find the old covenant things eventually waxed old and vanished away. They passed away. And what remained was the new covenant stuff, right? The new and living way remained. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let's show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe. Notice, Hebrews applies the shaking of the heavens and earth to the kingdom of God, right? Under the two covenants. Good? One covenant was shaken away. And the one, the eternal covenant under Jesus Christ, that remained. All right? So let's read for our final text here, 2 Corinthians 3 verse 11. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 11. And we're still in the New American Standard Bible. It says, "For if that which fades away was with glory, much more that which remains is in glory." What was Paul talking about? Here's the shaking. And he says that shaking was causing something to fade away and something to remain. Well, let's move up here to see what he was talking about. Let's see what he was talking about. He says, "But if the ministry of death engraved in letters on stones," what's that? That's the 10 Commandments, right? "Came with glory so that the sons of Israel could not look intently at the face of Moses because of the glory of his face, fading as it was, how will the ministry of the Spirit fail to be even more with glory?" So you notice, you have two ministrations here. Two covenant ministrations. You have one is called the ministry of death, which was concerning the 10 Commandments. And now you have the ministry of the Spirit, which was even more, which had even more glory than the 10 Commandment ministry. Verse 9, it says, "For if the ministry of condemnation," again, this is the old covenant administration, the old covenant administration. It says, "For if the ministration of condemnation has glory, much more does the ministry of righteousness excel in glory." Again, old covenant versus new covenant. "For indeed, what had glory," that's the old covenant, "in this case has no glory when compared to the new covenant." Because why? Of the glory that surpasses it. "For if that which fades away was with glory, much more that which remains is in glory." So here's the shaking. The kingdom of God was shaken. The old covenant administration under the ministration of condemnation and the ministration of death, which was concerning the letters written on stones, that was shaken out. Right? Engraved in stones, the 10 Commandments, along with all the sacrifices, along with all the offerings, along with all the holy days, the Sabbath days, and all of that. The sacrificial system, the Levitical priesthood, all of it was shaken out. All of these elements, all of these heavenly bodies, all of these rudiments, they were burned with fire. What remained? The stuff which cannot be burned with fire. The spiritual, the ministry of the Spirit. You can't burn the Spirit with fire. That was what remained. The ministry of righteousness. Remember Peter said, we are looking for a new heavens and earth in which dwells what? Righteousness. The ministry of the Spirit of Christ. Right? That was what Peter was speaking about when he talked about that passing of the heavens and earth. So let's close our study today. All right, let's close our study today. Go back. Peter said that they were in his day looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God in his day, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning and the elements will melt with intense heat. Yeah, that did happen. The destruction of the temple, which were Israel's covenant heavens, with the elements of the old covenant law administration through the ministration of condemnation and the ministration of death written on stones and all the associated things with that old covenant system that burned in the year 70. And what remained? The ministration of the Spirit. Right? It says, but according to his promise. According to whose promise? Jesus' promise. When did Jesus said his promise would come to pass? In the generation of Peter. He says they were looking for that new heavens and a new earth. What did the writer in Hebrews apply the shaking of the heavens and the earth to? The shaking of a kingdom. Right? But that kingdom, that new kingdom, that new generation of the new covenant kingdom could not be shaken. Right? He says we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken. Right? But the old version of it was shaken. It was shaken away. In which what? Righteousness dwells. Right? So we have come to the end of this 6th video in this series, the passing away of the heavens and earth. It was entitled The Dissolving of the Heavens and Earth. And if you appreciate this content, please like, please share, please subscribe. As I said, you may support the ministry by giving or becoming a Patreon member. There are 4 membership tiers with associated benefits at patreon.com/newcosmos. And if you choose the 2nd, the 3rd, or the 4th tiers, you can have access to my videos before they're released on YouTube up to 2 weeks ahead of time, ahead of others, right? And if you choose the 3rd or the 4th tiers, you can have access to the New Cosmos Masterclass. All right, so if you are searching for a deeper understanding of your purpose and value in God's sight, you need this masterclass. You may also purchase one or all of my books. I have 3 so far. Or you may purchase a mug, a t-shirt, a sweater, or a hoodie from the merchandise store. The links to these are all in the description. If I remember, I put them in the first comment. Until next time, I'm your friend Murray saying, may God richly bless you.
This has been the New Cosmos Videocast. Remember to comment, like, subscribe, and share.